Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session today to discuss how will data and modeling in your country change in the next 5 years. We have a really experienced panel representing a wide range of countries. Before I introduce everybody, I'm going to do two things. Firstly, I'm going to encourage you to ask questions during the presentations. And if you haven't participated in any sessions yet, to ask questions, you need to go to the conference room tab. And under the conference room tab, there's a Q&A tab. And on that tab, you can ask your questions, and I'll keep an eye on what's happening there. And then when everyone's done their presentations, we can go through some of the questions that you have. The second thing I'm going to do before I introduce the speakers is introduce myself. My name is Charlene Rohr. I'm a senior research leader at RAND Europe and co-director of RAND Europe Centre for Future and Foresight Studies. I've been estimating travel demand models for 25 years in the UK, Scandinavia, and Australia. And I'm interested in estimating models, using models to support decision making, and thinking about how models could better support this process. So, enough about me, on to our speakers. Our first speaker this morning, depending on where you are, is Tony Brennand. Tony Brennand's career in the transport sector in New Zealand spans 4 decades, with employment in a variety of government, including local government, entities, and private sector roles. Tony has a particular interest in strategic transportation and economic analysis, including transportation modeling and the coupling of transportation modeling with modeling in other disciplines, particularly economic disciplines. Tony has a passion for transportation research, particularly in its relationship to economic development. Our second speaker will be Graham Currie. Graham is a professor of public transport at Monash University and has over 40 years' experience in transport modeling and travel behavior research and consulting in Europe, North America, Asia, and Australasia. Our third speaker is Ashish Verma. He's the convener of the IISc Sustainable Transportation Lab. He has a PhD from IIT Bombay and is currently serving at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, India. He's authored more than 200 research publications in the area of sustainable transportation and road safety. He is the founding and current president of the Society of Transportation Research Group of India. Our fourth speaker will be Reza Mohammadi. He has over 30 years of experience in international across countries in transportation modeling, planning, and engineering. He has a PhD in transport engineering from Imperial College London and has been based in Dubai since 2003, setting up his company there in 2008. Our fifth speaker will be Dario Menichetti, who got the transport modeling bite during his early university years and has never really recovered from it. He defines himself as a transport modeling globetrotter with a mission to deliver pragmatic and usable modeling to answer complex mobility questions of today and tomorrow. His work journey is really very international, starting in Australia to Singapore, via Taiwan, Ghana, South Africa, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom, and many more. Since then, he's worked for both the private and government sectors in the Middle East before joining PTV Group in 2016, where he leads acquisition and delivery of major mobility projects in the Middle East, Africa, India, and the Asia-Pacific region. Our sixth speaker is Mohamed Shahin. He's the regional director of CGCE Middle East. He has over 27 years experience in transportation planning and modeling. He's a professor for transportation planning in Alexandria University, Egypt, and has conducted more than 180 transport consultancy projects with different international and local consultants. His work is published widely. Our final speaker probably needs no introduction. Tom, wearing a very fine tie this morning, is one of the few people who's happy to use the words transport, modelling and passion in a single sentence. He's chaired Modelling World since 2006, is Regional Director for the UK and Europe, and Vich Lister Consulting, and a visiting professor at the University of Leeds. So that's our panel. Today, we're going to start with you, Tony. 3 minutes to present your slide. Please go ahead now.
Thank you. Greetings, everybody. I'm not seeing where here we go. If we just move straight to the second slide, that'll be fine, thanks. We've seen a tremendous explosion in the amount of data available to the transport modeler in New Zealand over the last couple of decades. It was often very difficult to get good travel time or journey time data in the past, but now we've got things like BibTrack, TomTom, and all these other kinds of tools that allow data to really be there at our fingertips in a big way. This is not only going to generate management issues, but as we see this trend continuing, we're going to have better skills in our modelers in terms of the statistical analysis of this data. We also see a wider sets of data which reflects the more outcomes-driven analysis that we have to do these days, and so we will invariably be cross-tabulating transportation and traffic data with other sources of data, and rather than simply estimating a single model at a particular stage, we'll be able to take advantage of longitudinal information as it goes forward. There will be further new data sets becoming available, which we'll want to cross-tab with our transportation stuff, and this will introduce all sorts of other possibilities. Particularly, I'm seeing this as we think about the economic impacts of a transportation investment. What's going to be very important as we go forward is to be able to use the data that is available to better understand our the uncertainties around our modelling and the projections that we make. We've got to think of our input data in a fuzzy way, or as, if you like, probability distributions. We're going to move away from deterministic approaches and use more stochastic approaches. We're going to actually have to do far more detailed analysis of uncertainty, and will require to analyze our data, and hence the statistical skills I referred to before, to get a better understanding of uncertainty. This will invariably also be supported by good monitoring programs around uncertainty. Ultimately, in the end, it's the decision-making process that matters, that we feed into, and so the modelling world and the data we gather will need to support far more adaptive approaches. I'll leave it there.
Sorry, Charlene, you're on mute.
You've been on mute, Charlene.
Sorry. Graham, please go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. And hello, Modelling World International. Can you put my slide up, please? There she is. Okay. Well, this is quite a big responsibility to talk on behalf of the entire modelling community of an entire nation. And I think we should recognize that the entire modelling world doesn't agree what the future will be. So I did a very clever thing. I did a survey of everybody I could think of who were good in modelling. And there's 9 of them, and I got 9 responses. And this is the compiled results of what everybody in Australia in modelling that's good thinks about how will data and modelling landscape in your country change over the next 5 years. They're in order of the number of times that people said them. And the top 2 are that they think that in the future there'll be more and simpler scenario-based modeling. Also, there's a consensus amongst 3 of the 9 that we need more household travel data. There's always been a bit of a concern in Australia that we haven't got enough good data going into these things, and that's been a long-running issue. Then, second order, there's a view that big data is overhyped, overpriced, and underdelivered. Yeah, I'm talking about the fact that there's a bit of non-consensus going on, because the next couple said that we should have more AI and machine learning in modeling tool. So I kind of think there's a technical people out there with new ideas, but there's also a lot of practitioners out there saying, hey, these new ideas don't always work, you know. Also, there's a view that more activity-based modeling would be going on, and that we'd be doing agent-based modeling. And also that we'd be more multimodal in the next 5 years. Well, you know, fundamentally, Australia has been car-based, and like the rest of the world, we've been doing traffic modeling. But we're moving into other things. Then there was a whole host of other ideas. There was a view that we should be thinking about battery electric cars and recharging. Working from home is obviously one of the new great changes from COVID. There was a view that we should be looking at more off-peak modeling, more modeling wider economic outcomes, you know, accessibility, agglomeration, even psychological well-being, yes. More longitudinal data rather than these sorts of one-off studies. Better validation approaches was needed, more rural modeling, and also generally, you know, the COVID effects should be considered. And lastly, from Transport for New South Wales, a belief that we should be moving from predict and provide modeling, you know, we've got a congestion problem, we need more capacity, to what they call vision and validate. I thought that was a cool idea that really we can go beyond that in modeling. So that's it from me. That's what the modeling community in Australia thought the next 5 years could and should be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really excellent. Next up, we have Ashish Verma.
Thanks, Charlie. So let me give some reflections on how the data and modeling landscape in India would change over the next 5 years. Starting with, of course, the need for, you know, and more need going further in next 5-10 years on policy-sensitive models and scenario-based modeling for decision support. This is primarily from the fact that, you know, considering the time gap of transport system development that we have in India, there's a lot of leapfrogging opportunity, and that makes the importance of policy, you know, aspects quite important. And having policy-sensitive models could definitely support decision support, as well as you know, a more scenario-based modeling, giving a basket of evaluation of different scenarios and giving decision support. Further, the other important aspect is the emergence of multimodal transport system in many of our cities, especially the public transport, the emerging modes like electric micromobility options, shared mobility modes, etc. How do we model these multimodal transport system from the point of view of sustainability, not just modeling the transportation system, but also the externalities connected to it. And so, you know, seamless multimodal system incorporating emerging modes, and how do you focus and bring walking and cycling in, you know, as a mainstream mode in the modeling framework, and have our models that are sensitive to policies that target walking and cycling. Further, there would be more and more need for fusing the emerging and electronic data sources. You know, as many of us have been speaking about other countries also, there's a lot of electronic, you know, sources of data that we have. But the point is to bridge the data gaps. How can we merge these emerging data sources with the traditional travel surveys to bridge those data gaps for, especially for the policy sensitive models that we want to have. Of course, the challenge remains, which would be a focus in next 5 years, would be the data integration and access to the data for different stakeholders, for people to do research. and also make use of this data very well for the decision support. Looking at the heterogeneous disorder traffic, we still need improved microsimulation models, especially from the point of view of traffic management. That would be a focus that would go on for the next 5-10 years. Need for capacity building of practitioners to showcase the importance and usefulness of these transport models for planning and policy. I think we still lack that understanding and confidence among practitioners about what model gives us and how much we should rely on them. Further integrating modeling tools with strong visualization and easy to play with dashboards. Often we hear these requirements from the urban local bodies and other practicing agencies that we need easy to use dashboards. So if we can, more and more focus would be on how you make it easy for people to play with these modeling tools. Of course, on the regional and intercity travel, with a lot of focus on high-speed connectivity, we would see a lot more requirement of modeling high-speed travel at the regional and intercity level for planning and policy questions. Last but not the least, in many cases, simple models or even focused expert groups, are probably would be used as a better alternative for more complex, problems or systems where too many factors and too many, things are influencing the decision support. That's all from my side, Charlene. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, Reza, let's hear about the UAE.
Thank you, Charlene. Hello, everybody. So I'm going to just talk about how with the Middle East data and modeling landscape changes with specific reference to the UAE. So the first area that I think that is currently being implemented or being considered in the enhancement of the existing transport models is just a more disaggregated approach, modeling through activity and agent-based modeling. This is important because of the emergence of the new forms of transport technologies and shared mobility services. So it is important to travelers these days have multiple choice of modes in order to complete their journeys. So it's important to ensure that these new models or enhanced models can model these new forms of transport technologies more accurately. Smart data collection. Good models require good data, and data collection is always expensive. And in this part of the world, some surveys is impractical or difficult to implement, such as household interview surveys, where it's required to visit people's homes. So therefore, smart data collection techniques such as GPS tracking, use of mobile data, or using app-based surveys are being explored to collect more extensive data and more accurate data for using the enhancements of these existing models. Integration of passenger and freight modeling. The emphasis so far in this part of the world has been on passenger modeling. However, the freight transport is growing fast, and with the emergence of e-commerce and online shopping and the COVID-19, there is a need to put more focus on freight modeling, but also integrated with the passenger model. Real-time modeling. This is important as there is a wealth of data coming in from a number of online sources, and the authorities are quite keen to use this data in order to better manage existing transportation system and provide a more dynamic and a real-time response to traffic issues. Lastly, hybrid absolute incremental models. The structure of the existing transport models in the UAE is absolute models, and the reason for that is that the difference between the base and the future landscape is quite significant, i.e. the land use pattern is very different in the future compared to the base year, and that's why we have an absolute model. However, as the cities have been growing over the past 20 years and with more densification in the cities, there is a need to link the base and the future year models, but also to take advantage of the efforts that are put in to produce a very robust and validated base year model. So there's a need to produce hybrid absolute and incremental models. So these are 5 areas that are actually being considered and being implemented in the UAE. Thank you, Charlene.
Thank you very much. We're more than halfway through our speakers. No questions yet. So if you have those questions burning in your mind, now is the time to start asking them. Our next speaker will be Dario Menichetti.
Thank you, Charlene. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, I think. I'm very happy to see modeling world going this global. I think it was really needed. And today I will be summarizing what's for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia now, how we see that in the next 5 years. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, just as a sentence of background, is undergoing, for those that are not familiar with the country, with a very ambitious transformation from oil-based economy to a non-oil-based economy, as well as developing many of different industry sectors, for example, such as tourism, which was recently launched. And all this is sealed in what is called a Vision 2030, that is the key ambition of where the country wants to be over the next decade or so. So how do we see the modeling panorama over the next 5 years? And by observing and working on the ground in Saudi Arabia, we have seen in the past that modeling was pretty much scattered. Models were developed in a scattered way across the country with mostly project-based. What's happening right now is that authorities are trying to consolidate into state-of-the-art modern planning systems all these models in order to create integrated planning systems that are, of course, characterized by a multi-model. This is nothing new. But also the ability to represent freight and passengers in an integrated platform, and the ability to be connected with sources of data. They are trying to regulate this model, not only in a way that they will enable control access to stakeholders and control use of that, but also investigating business models and how to make data and models output accessible to the various stakeholders. Accessibility of models is very important, in my opinion, because, as I said, the ability to use the outputs of the models in the right way and being accessible, being understandable to decision makers. It's a very hot topic that should bridge the gap between practitioners and the decision maker itself. At the end of the day, models are there to support them into the decisions and make it in a very fast pace as the country is going. Second topic that I think it's very important is that as part of Vision 2030, Saudi Arabia is also planning to develop, and actually they're already under construction, some greenfield mega developments, are they called, very ambitious, but these developments are characterized by really disruptive ideas with visions that are completely different from the world we have been used. This is one of my favorite modeling topic, to be honest, where of course we don't have any data to collect in order to learn from for developing this model. So what we see here is that it's a modeling approach where first we develop with the requirements and models that can represent phenomena, and then we use them to represent multiple scenarios. So it's more of a scenario-based modeling that will go a lot into Saudi Arabia for this mega development to support the development of these visions that characterize that extreme things like no private ownership of cars. And of course, these models has to be characterized by the ability to run a lot more scenarios and include a lot of more of stochasticity into their structure. Hoping on
Dario,
what Reza already said. Yes.
Can I ask you to quickly finish up?
Yeah, absolutely. Open freight model is much more important than passenger in the region. So freight modeling and port competition especially requires model that represents the wider regions, and because the cost competition is to be represented across the board and and depends on the onward cost, but also incorporation of emerging technology, hot topic, into existing models, for example, Hyperloop or autonomous vehicle or shared mobility. And last but not least, and closing here, we see a lot of movement into the development of competence on the local side with universities, but as well as authorities developing modeling expertise. And this is again another topic that is close to my heart, because what I see at the moment is that we will see in the future a lot more modelers sitting in Saudi Arabia, which will be do good for the success of the country.
Thank you. Next up, Mohamed.
Yeah. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Modeling World International 2021. Can you move into my slide, Charlie?
There we go.
Yes, here we go. I'm speaking here on not only in Egypt, but also most of Middle East countries, how modeling landscape will be changed. First item, which is already spoken about, but I would like to take it from other dimension, it is COVID. What's happened to COVID that many people start to believe in Middle East countries, or most countries in the Middle East, on learn from home, distance learning, meetings from home, conference from home. This was always in the previous or before COVID era. It was always like ideas, and we were including this as a planning or as scenarios or as unmeasured scenarios to improve the output in the future or whatever. Now we need to take it as a fact which will impact all models. We need to include in our survey forms. We need to include we need to model it. We need to model work from home. We need to model learn from home in order to allow our models to be more sensitive with such issues. It was, as I said, it was only in the head of the people like idea, which will not take place, but now it took place, and already people interacted through media, and that's why this has to be taken in the future modeling. Public transportation, many cities, I'm not saying all cities, many cities in Middle East didn't have or is still ongoing in building their public transportation. That's why when we were building our models, the base year model was always only touching or didn't find even survey for the existing public transportation. Now we have to or in 5 years we have to learn how to incorporate this from the beginning in the base year. In the future, we have not to take it only as a planning wise. It was only planning. We will plan some routes, and these routes will take this share. But now it should be taken into consideration that as a fact, which will grow up. There is increase in the share of some public transportation routes. There is additional new planning public transportation. ITS applications also in most cities were not implemented, but now it's going to be implemented. That's why even in public transportation or in road cars, that's why this should be treated as a fact in the base year models and taken for the future. Fourth item, more local experts in transportation modeling. I'm saying model from heart and not model from head. Always, or in most cases, the countries are invited international modelers to build their models. They are starting even from creating the survey and designing the survey and interview and the questionnaire. Nowadays, it starts to boom with more local experts who will model their cities and their countries from head and heart. They will look more in details in the questionnaire. They will understand more the behavior and the culture of the people, which will allow producing more accurate models. Finally, the data. As everyone said, and I will not speak about it, but it is booming, of course. One of the most deficiencies items in most Middle East countries is the data accuracy, or the data collected accuracy. Now we will have other sources which will allow more accurate data in developing the models. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And last, but certainly not least, Tom, let's hear your thoughts on the way forward.
Okay, thank you, Charlene. Nice to not have to chair for a change and just be able to speak. I thought I'd do something similar to Graham and do a quick meta-analysis of the previous speakers and do a quick poll, but I think I've written down about 30 different views of how the data and modeling landscape may change around the world. So that's not going to lead to an academic paper, I think. So let's stick to the points that I had written down when I prepared for this. And although I don't think that my expectations about how the data and modeling landscape will change differs much from the other speakers, I think it may be worthwhile putting them into slightly different, putting them forward in a slightly different way and from a UK perspective. So I expect, and I haven't heard it mentioned too much, a greater use of activity and particularly agent-based models, and quite a few of these are being sort of developed here in the UK. But I don't think that they will replace our existing strategic models wholesale. And I want to make a point here. I want to defend the models that we have and the expertise that went into it. I want to defend the professional expertise and experience that exists in the UK, and hope we're not throwing away the baby with the bathwater. And I want to defend the software packages that have been developed and are being used. Now, there's an enormous amount of quality and robustness in those. So there are improvements that I see will happen, but I expect they will be incremental. And I've said this elsewhere. I expect an evolution rather than a revolution in that particular case. Second point is that I would expect to see a move to data-driven models. And by that, I mean that models will be driven from databases that can lead most models almost automatically. So rather than databases being collected for individual software packages, the software packages will take their feeds from these general databases. And that allows short-term operational prediction through traffic management and technical planning to long-term strategic models. Reduce the need for dedicated surveys, reuse and recycling data across these various time and spatial horizons. And I expect those obviously to contain traditional and big data sources. And that's my third point, is that I expect we will find ways in which big data to its full extent. Until now, I feel we've shoehorned big data into the data poor structures that underpin many of our models that were developed in data poor times, and particularly that will be the case for strategic models. I think one way in which that will happen is that models will again be built from big data with the sole reason of improving our understanding what is happening, particularly what is happening coming out of the COVID pandemic. First understand, then worry about how we incorporate that understanding into our forecasting tools. Now, there are two final points I really would want to make. One is that rather than seeking a significant change in our data and models to support decision-making under uncertainty, I expect that we will have to, and we will see the main efforts going into helping decision makers deal with this uncertainty. I think decision makers will struggle even more with our modeling output if we provide them with an overload of information, possibly without any insight into which futures are more likely than others. So the amount of modeling will not reduce, but the way in which we must present our model result will have to, and I think I agree there with Mohamed as well. The greatest challenge that I think we face as modelers, and it hasn't been mentioned, I believe, is supporting how we're dealing with the climate change emergency, really. Both to support decision makers that face the difficult and I expect very unpopular decisions and interventions that are necessary, but also to reflect that to meet the carbon reduction targets, people's perceptions of how to travel, the value of travel, the need to travel will have to change. Now, if we actively try to change that behavior, the parameters that we estimate in our base year calibration will not be valid for forecasting. And I think temporal transfer of models will be less and less defensible. That, to me, is the greatest challenge. How do we estimate parameters for future forecasts that are theoretically defensible, based on evidence, robust in application, and unbiased? So that's my my challenge for questions from the audience. That's it for me, Charlene. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. So I would now like to invite all of the speakers to actually turn on your cameras so that we can see you all. And we're going to take some questions from the audience. And I see some very interesting questions coming in. And I'm going to start with one from Lindsay Oxlade, something that's not come up at all in just the discussions that we've had. His question is as follows. Alexa Del Bosque highlighted the need to understand how our experience, frame of reference, shapes our judgment on model efficacy. Are we at risk of only planning for people like us? I'm gonna ask Graham to maybe say something about that, because I know that you did your survey across people, and did anyone mention issues like this, and what do you think about how we might solve these sorts of questions?
Well, we solve it by being inclusive and listening to a wider audience. I once did a study of transport modeling, and I was interested in people with social disadvantage. And but the obvious source for all transport models that I know are household travel surveys. Well, guess what? Household travel surveys don't ever survey anybody that are homeless. Yeah, how are you going to do your modeling based on a survey when people don't have a house? Well, you know, that's the reality of their life. So you need to be inclusive. Yeah, the answer, simply put, is that you need to include a wider audience in the behaviors that you're exploring and researching and representing in models.
Charlene, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Can I
Tom,
add to that?
go ahead.
Yeah, I think following up from what Graham said, I think one of the problems that we've had as modelers is that it's very difficult to reach non-users, and we have generally failed to do so. And this is where I see big data becoming sort of more valuable, because big data captures everyone's behavior rather than just the people that we see in the transport system and can reach in the transport system. Now, it's not easy because big data doesn't give us behavioral data, but I think there are ways in which we can start understanding who we are missing and how we may be able to represent their behavior as well. So I think there are people that, and I think Graham saw that in his questionnaire, that think that big data is not going to be valuable. I think big data is going to be extremely valuable in achieving exactly that.
Tom, I'm going to ask this question to you next, because it follows on from what you've just said. A question raised by Stephen Craig is that AI sources and big data, we're now seeing that those can discriminate against people because of biases and gaps in the data. So how would you address sort of fears or concerns in that direction in the use of big data?
Well, I think what Stephen might be referring to is that particularly electronic and IT and information system participation differs across population groups. That can be dealt with by segmentation and by making sure that even if we don't have representative sample in that big data, we will have certain groups that are overrepresented and underrepresented. That is, we have dealt with that in our surveys all the time. So it's a matter of segmentation and expansion on that basis. As long as we know, if we are aware that there may be discrimination, we have the tools to deal with it.
Does anyone else want to add to that? There's a question from Stephen Piotrowski. I'm sorry if I've really messed that up. That he has for all speakers, which is a question I myself also have, is about thoughts on household travel surveys versus big data. What's the right balance? Will we ever be able to provide the level of detail we need from big data to calibrate strategic models? Are these data going to help us in some of the questions that people raised about disaggregate, understanding details of what specific people are doing? What's the right balance between household surveys and big data? And Reza, would you like to say something about that?
Well, I mean, from my point of view, I think household travel diary surveys give you a lot of information that you may not cover. If you are taking the data from sources like big data, I mean, I don't have much expertise in using big data, but from the personal interaction with the people and because some of the questions that you need to understand accurately in order to develop the model, that you may not be able to get it from big data. So I mean, I think from big data you have I assume that you would have access to a large database and which is very useful in order to develop the models, but may not necessarily provide the details that are also equally important in getting an accurate and a robust model for predicting travel patterns and movements in the transportation network. So you're right. What's the balance between the two? I think the balance is between the amount of data and the level of details, and I think they're equally important. And as I said, I don't really have much experience of using big data. Maybe Tom and others can comment on that. But I think the details, the accuracy of the data is extremely important. And also, especially in the Middle East, the questions that you ask, because the people are not really used to these type of surveys in the Middle East. And therefore, understanding the responses that you get is also very important. And that only comes from having interviewed them personally and individually, rather than getting your data from some source that doesn't give you the accuracy and the details that you require.
Does anyone else have a view here? Ashish?
Thanks, Charlene. I feel big data cannot really replace completely the requirement of household travel survey. And that's what, as I was also presenting in my one slide, that bringing these data sets together to bridge certain gaps, for example, data gaps that we will not be able to capture well with the household travel surveys, or the limitation of sampling that we would have with the household travel survey, that can be bridged to a good extent. Or in other words, a more accurate validation of household travel survey. So there are a lot of these aspects that we can improve upon by fusing the data sets together. And also in terms of the household travel survey, moving from trip-based diaries to more activity travel, daily diaries probably can also enrich the data that we can capture from household travel survey. On the point of view of how we can involve or include data about marginalized sections who will not be well represented in these data sets, one of the way could be to have stakeholder consultation embedded very well in a planning process, at different stages of the planning process, within which, of course, modeling and the results of modeling are an important aspect, but having stakeholder consultation embedded very well, which is something that at least in India we see quite lacking, and that also probably is one of the reasons why we are not able to bring in the requirements and aspects of marginalized groups. Just some thoughts. Thanks, Charlene. You're on mute, Charlene.
Yeah. Dario, what would you like to add? I think you're on mute.
Yes. No, from my side, what I think that theoretically big data could one day be able to replace and help us estimate, calibrate strategy model. But I agree with Ashish that today, practically, there are some issues that prevent us this. Such, for example, the ability to get this data at all, because the biggest problem, the biggest issue is that this data are just kept in the database and are not shared. So this with the level of details that is required to calibrate strategy models. But the issue we will have to face, because we learn as modelers, and we will have to ask ourselves the questions in the next years. Pandemic taught us that household travel surveys is no longer a thing. It's no longer possible even to plan for them in a way that you can actually go into the houses of people or be close to people. So in the future, I believe that the pandemic has accelerated the thinking, and we will need more of data scientists, more accessibility of data. And with that, we can start and work towards removing reliance from household travel surveys. So, but this is an issue that we will have to pose ourselves and find an answer. And I think it will include have more data scientists across the community as well.
Have we lost Charlene?
It seems like we have.
Okay, whilst we give Charlene a chance to dial back in, shall I just quickly take over? Mohamed, you wanted to add to that. You're on mute as well, remember?
Yeah, now is okay. Yes, I would like to add something. I see from this point, traffic survey versus big data. In the short term, we will need both of them in order to fulfill the gap between of them. But definitely in the long term, we will depend only in the big data, because as said, we are doing modeling. It will work. Every problem we will face nowadays or in the short term will be solved through solutions. Yes, within the coming 5 years, we might depend on both. We might depend more on the traffic survey. Over the coming 10 years, it will be 50-50. But for the long term, definitely we will depend on the big data. Thanks.
I wonder if I could add a slightly different perspective, in the sense that these different kinds of data all have their strengths and the weaknesses for us. And really the critical issue is not whether this data set is better than that, or we'll move to this or that. It's actually how we use the data, how we interpret the data, and how we infer understandings from this data. And again, I think the big move, I think, going into the future will be around this whole issue of uncertainty and the fuzziness of our forecasts.
Yeah, I think this is a very, very fair point there, Tony. And I remember, I'd say probably even more than 5 years ago, that a colleague of mine here in the UK, Jaron Hollander, who wrote, I think, the book Transport Modeling for Dummies, look it up on Amazon, who actually said that at this point in time, we probably would all be data scientists rather than transport modelers, and it hasn't happened. So there will be a continued need for improving our data analysis techniques and using people or bringing people in, relying on people that have actually been trained to do so. I'm going to continue with my chairing role then, and I am going to take a question here from Phil Sumner, and I'm going to point that at you, Tony. Will analysis of transport systems need to be integrated more with the analysis of housing, of jobs, and other infrastructure?
I believe it will, is the simple answer. And I think there's a considerable richness to be gained by actually fusing some of these data sets together and getting good understandings of what the various data sets really mean when they are fused together. So simple answer is yes.
Others want to add to that? Was it you, Dario? Sorry, Ashish. Sorry, I was just checking for other questions. So yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think definitely, I mean, there is more and more realization that transportation system is only a subset within the whole urban system, and the causality and interaction with the other subsystems is extremely important to model to get an overarching understanding, especially when you are looking at sustainable habitats and more focus on quality of life and livability. So these aspects then become extremely important, and that's where I think modeling and data needs to improve. And that's why I keep saying in the Indian context also that policy-sensitive models are extremely important in such a situation and requirement.
Thank you. Any takers? Otherwise, I'm going to take, I think, a very good question from Henk Thaler in the Netherlands. That will take us in a slightly different direction. It seems to me we've talked a lot about data, and that a lot of the questions are coming about, I think, our ability to make best use of existing data, the need of new data collection techniques, or actually going back to good old household surveys that are or are not essential for us to understand really what's going on. Henk is making the point that in the Netherlands, quick scan tools are being developed, which fill the gap between traditional transport models and expert judgment. So simpler models, faster to run, possibly meta models based on more complex models that have been run thousands of times to get sort of the relationships that allow you to run these faster. Graham, I'm going to send that to you because I have seen these attempted in academia before. My view was always, if we can model it in a simple way, we would have done it, but that might be the modeler's view rather than the end user's view. Charlene, you're back in charge.
Sorry, I'd like to say I've gone for coffee, but no.
Graham.
So the question is about the simpler models or the better ones. Look, I think one of the problems with very, very large models is we often don't know why they came up with the answer that they came up with. And there's plenty of errors in models. And the models I'm talking about are the ones in the real world that everybody has to use. Now, in my opinion, simplicity is better. And actually, you can learn a lot from very simple models. The problem is that we probably don't do enough of it, to be frank. I mean, the number one issue from the Australian people I talked to was that we need more scenario-based modeling that are, quicker and easier to use. So I think there's a lot to be said for this. I'm afraid that large models kind of get an infrastructure and a resource around them that makes everybody think we have to keep on using them. And they kind of have their own life. And I think that can take over, and we should be a bit more nimble and flexible using alternatives.
I would like to add, actually, that our models are a tool to help us think. And the critical issue is how we think. And so we need tools that don't stop us thinking, because I think what Graham was getting at there is that sometimes some of these very large models to take over, I think you were saying, and but it really, in the end, it's the modeler and the modeler's thinking that is all important here.
Can you hear me? Yeah, to this, what I would like to add is a perspective that I think also this is a very important topic, how we bridge the gaps. I don't believe that we can have quick scan tools, models, but what I think, given a perspective, also given the fact that the future, as we know, is uncertain, and we need to think more in this with this uncertainty. We should try to depart more from the focus of develop complex and precise models and spend a lot of time into that, but have smarter technologies that allows us and let the technology fill that gap and think about more the interpretation. So thinking more. So this is why I believe modelers will never stop to exist, because we will need people that actually think and rethink the requirements of the model, the design of these models, and on the other side, how spend a lot more time, which I believe we never spend enough, in order how we actually can be closer to the decision making in order to convey, interpret and convey what these models are telling us to them. And this is where I think in the future we should spend more time rather than be busy with super precise Bayesian models, since the future is going to be completely different from what we see today.
Can I ask a follow-on question? And if you've already answered it, you can say we've already answered it. But one of the ways I've seen of developing simpler models is from more complex models. So the idea that our complex models sort of are a meta-analysis in some ways of all of what we understand about behavior, and they therefore can provide some of the inputs like elasticities to simpler models. So would people agree or disagree with the view that actually we need both? And I know that Tom did not want me to say that, because modelers are always saying we need more models, but isn't the basis of our understanding for simple models come from what we understand from our more complex models? And does anyone have a view about that?
Yeah,
Reza?
if I may. I mean, the purpose of these models are to support, they are tools, as mentioned by others. These are tools to support the decisions that decision makers and authorities are making in investing large amounts of money in developing a transportation network. As long as these models can provide the answers, the simpler the better. But the problem is that the simple models do not necessarily provide the answers. And therefore, I agree with you that you need a more complex model, but from that, then you can develop a more, a simpler model. For example, I give you an example in Dubai. There are operators that want to operate air taxis in Dubai, and they go to the authorities and they ask for permissions. They ask for license to run these air taxis. And the authorities need to know exactly what sort of routes, what's the demand, and what sort of fare they should be charging. And these cannot be answered by simple models, although they do not have necessarily impact on the transportation network as such, because the demand would be very low. But you do need a more complex model so that you can actually model these behavior. So in my view, that the simpler model are good as long as they can answer the questions, but I don't think they answer all the questions.
Can I jump in there, Charlene? somebody said that, by the way, as you said, that I didn't want simpler models. Somebody said Tom will make it to his retirement, so it doesn't with the existing or with new models. So I'm not that worried about that. However, I think your point about meta models is really, really valid and interesting, and I'm disappointed that we haven't managed as a profession to actually have a test case of actually doing so, because that would help us do two things. One is help us understand whether this is possible or not. And I agree with Reza, that we have complex models because the interaction between land use and transport and people rather than electrons moving around, and the dynamics both in the short term and the long term that we are trying to represent has driven us to more complex models. But if we can run meta models based on thousands and thousands of relevant rows of models, we may find out if this is possible, and I think it will help decision making enormously. But we can also find out where the discontinuities are. Where are the real reasons and the needs to have more complex model analyses, like the example that Reza gave, and where is it okay to sort of say, you know what, if I'm looking at fare changes, or I'm looking at policies that are actually relatively flat across the whole area, I can actually just do a much simpler run. So I would say I'm disappointed that we haven't seen it, and it's about time that we identify how we can use our more complex models to develop simpler models.
I would add we have seen it. I'm aware of at least one study where numbers of models were run, I don't know, 50 times to create a metal model funded by the European Union. So I think there are tests, but I think it's only now that we're really focused on uncertainty where people are much more interested in this topic. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to add?
I would agree. We also see in the region the development of meta models that are, building upon the body of understanding that more complex models that have been developed has given us. So we've seen that also here in the Middle East. The thing maybe is a way we are presenting that we should try to change. We were talking about simple model, complex models. I think that, as hoping on what Tom said and what I said before, that this model we need to understand and decide and design if these models are good for that particular use case. Just not force particular complexity where it's not required. So that's where the model and the thinkers, the modelers and the thinkers are needed to spend more time. In that sense, if a meta model could be derived from a more complex model and then answer the question and provide to the decision maker a clear answer, that why not? That's absolutely what is needed to bridge. But maybe we should present them differently. Not a simple model is not necessarily not good.
In terms of another question, I guess one of the questions I had was, has COVID-19 changed our modeling or data requirements? I wondered, Mohamed, whether you had a view about that.
Yes, of course. It changed and will change, I think, forever. Especially the issue of work, distance learning and work from home and meeting within social media. I think it's being changed in the behavior of the people to do that, in the behavior of the government to implement that. Many governments found that this is a magic solution to reduce the supply needed for everything, supply for roads, supply for transportation modes, supply even for the infrastructure of physical works or physical education. That's why it's fact and should be considered in the future, the impact of COVID on the transportation. and on the modeling, of course.
Graham?
Yes, well, the behaviors have changed. There are two fundamental types of behavior change. There is work from home suppressing commuting, and there is mode shift from transit to other modes because of infection fear. And these are long-term sustainable things. They're actually much bigger at the moment during COVID, but they're long-term after COVID, they're likely to sustain. And there's also spatial variations in them. And now, to my mind, that is really about travel behavior research and the inputs to models. So to my mind, the models themselves don't necessarily have to change. It's just the calibration and the validation of the models. And we can probably use the existing models and just tweak them to represent these things. But at the moment, we don't really know what the behavior changes are in each city. And that's the real problem, is the behavioral side of it hasn't been sorted out yet. So, you know, I think the models can work as they are, but we just need to get them to fit the behaviors.
Can I add to that, Charlene? I think the point that Graham makes on working from home is, for me, really important, because the majority of expectations is that people will work from home more, and therefore we can adjust patient models. The amount of people commute. Of course, we don't understand yet, or we are probably starting to get the data on how people are using the time and changing their daily activity patterns and their travel patterns around making fewer commute trips, and those would be trips that would be made somewhere else, probably around the home. So I think we need to start to understand through the surveys, and I know that Graham is carrying out such surveys in Melbourne, what the secondary impacts, as it were, are of the changes that people are making in their lives, because they may affect other parts of our strategic models as well. So rather than trying to make our strategic models really complex now, we need to focus on improving our understanding and then start thinking about how we could implement that in our existing models, or indeed, and I think someone else said that as well, or indeed where the way in which we simplified decision making in terms of transport choices in a different way. That to me is the opportunity that COVID has offered as well.
I will add to this one thing, reiterating what I said before. Again, opportunity, hopping on Tom, to the fact that the pandemic made impossible to collect certain data at this point, as we used to be before. So this is really, for me, the change. So you can see now people are trying to develop solutions, making synthesized models based on previous data, and so what we need to live with the fact there are many projects ongoing, and then all of a sudden you can't collect this data, even if you wanted to, or you had the facility with all the problems that already data collections have. So there's an opportunity there to rethink the way of doing this through this pandemic, which I think accelerated it. The other topic that, of course, it's more related to the model structure is that obviously working from home and what pandemic did, which I believe will continue even after pandemic, also by definition removed trips for commuting, for example, but added a lot of trips on the delivery side and the freight side, especially more small vehicles and all that. So that particular element of logistics and tours of these vehicles needs now to be thought and represented in our model, because they will not go away. People will continue to smart work, will continue to order deliveries more than and not go into the shopping mall. So this particular phenomena now and is become much more important, is to be considered in any model, in my opinion.
Can I come in, Shirley?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I think just reflecting on the impact of COVID-19, I fully agree with what Graham was saying, that it's essentially the travel behavior that really impacts, and how we can capture that accurately and recalibrate our models. For example, simple trip generation, regression models that we do, it won't be directly proportional to the employment opportunities in a zone or population of the zone, because a lot of people would be working from home, and those kind of changes might reflect how the calibration changes. But the challenge what we face is could be an equity issue, because in these pandemic times you can't do a traditional conventional household travel survey data, or even if you rely on big data in a country like India, you would still not have smartphone penetration in certain low income sections of the society. And so how do we capture the travel behavior data of those sections through conventional or unconventional data sources? I have been experiencing, there's a special issue that I have been guest editing for transport policy Elsevier on transport policy in post-COVID world, and the amount of manuscripts that I have seen from across the world. All the data that they've captured is through internet, or by accessing people through social media and so on. So in that case, you leave out a large section of population which may not be accessible over these mediums, for data collection. So I was really feeling bad that almost 40-50 research papers that I got from across the world, it really misses out information on how COVID has impacted the marginalized sections, because that data is almost missing, and it's a unfortunate and ironical situation. Thanks.
Could I add to Charlene, that not only, and you're dead right, Ashish. In fact, we have just done a meta study. There are 4,237 papers published on travel and COVID-19 at the moment. Of the ones that have measured travel, they've all used, just about all used online surveys, and 80% of them have not factored for non-response bias. 80%. Now, why is that important? Well, what they're studying is working from home, and the only people they're talking to are the people who can work from home. They're not talking to the people who traditionally don't do online surveys, the older people who don't use the internet, and the low-income groups who've got jobs that they couldn't use the internet for, which means that 80% of all the studies on planet Earth today are wrong. The answers they're giving are overestimating work from home. So it's a very, very big issue. I'm glad you've raised it, Ashish.
True. I think the other thing is, and I mentioned that in my sort of closing comments of my sort of 3-minute presentation, is as we are also very much in danger of being biased in the way in which we interpret the results, from a perspective even as transport planners, of wanting to see the benefits of what would have been possible, might have been possible, if some of the trends in behavior change that we have seen in certain groups would be spread across the whole population. And to the extent that I see this amount of advocacy now taking place with data that have been collected to make the points that people would like to make, whether it is doom mongering around, we're all going to die because people are going back in larger quantities to cars, or the optimism that may exist because in a biased sample we see so much working from home and a continued desire to work from home, rather than the reality of the cross section of the population. So I think it's very much worth our while being aware of that bias that we have, and the bias that many of the people that we rely on for that information to feed into our models have got as well.
Charlene, you're on mute.
As usual.
Here I go again, back to my sorry, Charlene. do not mute again. Do not mute again. Anyway, whilst you try to sort that out, let me take a question that Craig McPherson asked. And his question was, how can we make our models more explainable? Simpler models might help, but we also should find ways in which we explain conventional travel model results and models themselves and machine learning models. Anybody has got any views on how we do that? Tony, you've got your microphone open, so you can answer it.
Can I? That'll teach me to leave it open.
Absolutely.
This is a very interesting question, but a very important question as well. And I've been giving some thought to that for some time. In some of the circles I've been working in, there have been suggestions that we might want to recruit people who have a task of translating model speak into plain English. Now, that might be a particular skill set that might help us, but that has been given serious consideration in some circles.
Others. Dario, you're open as well, so you can answer this too.
I can, yeah, well, as I covered before, I think that models fail at the last mile. So in spending time, first of all, while we organize all these phenomena with this complex modeling, we fail in organizing this data, these outputs in a way that can be understandable. Spend more time onto that. So the organization and the consolidations of the results with interpretation is something very important. Of course, that implies also that we can summarize effectively the results, perhaps with visualizations or dashboards. That again, I'm a little bit. I like pragmatic modeling, but I don't believe in complete standardization. But dashboards that are fit for purpose, again, for the requirements of the particular question that is asked, and then at the end of the day, through some simple to answer summary KPIs and visualization of the results, can tell the story without even the modeler talking about it. That's what I think it is really required.
Tom, if I could.
Yeah, Graham, yeah.
The problem is modelers. I'm afraid that I have in my head my own version of stereotypes of modelers that I've seen in my life. And often the best ones are real boffins who sit in back rooms with data and formulas. And these guys are not communicators, okay? And every modeling community I know, there's someone there that takes this data in and the outputs and reinterprets it and puts it into plain speaking to talk to politicians, because you've got to have that. And we've got to get the modelers to start talking simple words that people can understand. I love the idea of graphics from Dario. I think that's a really good one. It is what we need to do with the profession, is make people speak simple words so everybody can understand. And you know what will happen with that? It will not just be that people understand models better. It will be that the models will get better.
Even better. It's an interesting one. Models getting better, I think, is a tricky one, because I would personally say that models will get more complex if you try to make them better, and that's a natural way in which sort of modelers would, the boffins would develop them. I think models getting better at supporting decision making is what you would also be looking for. I go back to a TRB session that I attended about 10 years ago in Washington DC, where I think it was David Hartgen led a discussion on humility or hubris of in transport modeling. Now there's a good story about it, and I won't bore you with that. However, I think it brings back to me sort of the point we as modelers need to have the confidence that we know what we're doing. And as I said earlier, I think we got some really, really clever people and very committed people and really good software as well. But we also have to be willing to say that we don't always know, that our models give us answers and we just don't know what's going on. And that doesn't mean that all of a sudden we are not, we're not professionals. This doesn't mean all of a sudden that we don't need modeling. It will actually strengthen the confidence that others have got, that the outputs from models and the advice that we give on the basis of models is more credible. And it's not just about language. I think it's also about behavior and having that confidence to say, I don't know what's going on, so let's do something else. Let's just rely on a data analysis rather than the model. Let's just see what other information is available to support that decision. And that also, I think, brings us back to that question of simpler models. I used to say about complex models, one version of the truth. We all can talk about the same numbers, the same kind of future. And now, of course, with all that uncertainty that we've started to realize, maybe more futures, more model analyses, your model and my model, rather than your model versus my model, is what's going to move us to the next phase.
Tom, let's not, sorry.
Yeah,
please.
Off you go.
No, let's not forget again that we as modelers exist and are there because there are questions that others cannot answer. So when at the beginning of, when the question is asked for modelers to say, I don't know yet, is a perfectly is a perfectly acceptable answer, because first of all, we need to put our brains down in it and model it, and then we'll come to understanding and answer the question. But how this is communicated is and I agree, it is the important topic. So the communication on the modeling side could be augmented, and I've seen, because I've been working with clever people that are doing exactly what Graham's saying, so bringing down what the models output are, and in a very fast manner convey some messages. It is very important, but first of all, the modelers, they to come out of the cage to be confident to give that to give the answer to that. Okay, well, I know what I'm doing. This is the results. Now we got to communicate it, and this again, it boils down to spending time during the requirement phase in order to always understanding what the problems is and model it, and not always go with standard that or method from the past that are recycled. We need to think more.
I'm going to ask the last question. Sorry, we've lost Charlene. Problems with browsers, I believe. And that's going. I think it's quite an interesting one for the whole panel. We've got about 5 minutes left. So there are a couple of questions around. We rely heavily on the sensors in many of our models, and in many countries, they are the key inputs to models and forecasting. What is your view? Should the sensors, or any sensors, be delayed until we get more stability, or are we better off having a census that is this year, where many countries are in disarray and many things are changes? And if we have a census now, what do you see the value is of that for our modeling? I'm going to start with you, Ashish. You talked about this a little earlier as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think it's a very important question, and India typically goes for census every 10 years, and we were due for the census in 2020, 2021, and which didn't happen and got delayed. My larger understanding is probably that we should wait for things to stabilize before we capture. Otherwise, what you would get may not be reflective of a more stable and long-term situation. While of course, it may be important to understand the COVID impacts on travel, housing, and other factors, migration, etc. We might do some, bridging of, small sample-based data collection, but having full-fledged census, probably we should wait. And that's what I feel. Thanks.
Others. Hi, Charlene. Sorry, Charlene, we are you can finish the session in 5 minutes. I'll just continue with my question. Is that okay?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Reza, I see your...
Yeah. I mean, I think that the COVID-19 situation has lasted for more than a year right now, and it probably is going to go for another year or two. I don't know when it's going to finish. So it's quite a reasonable period. And I think it's important, as was mentioned before by Graham and others, that it's important to capture the travel behavior during this period as well. So I don't think that the census should be delayed. I think the census should be undertaken because it's important to capture what's happening today, because this situation may happen again in the future, and therefore it's important to have an understanding of, in case of these incidences, in this sort of situation, what is going to take place. And if you have the data, then you can model it better and accurately. So in my view, it should happen.
Yeah.
Graham?
Yeah.
Sorry, Mohamed. I'm just first Graham,
okay.
then Mohamed.
I kind of understand where you're coming from, Reza, but I actually agree with Ashish. The reason is that the full census is a very big beast, and it actually takes 3 years or so before the results come out. So if we want to understand the various situation about travel as well as employment and many of the other things, population levels, it's going to take 3 years. And of course, is the answer relevant? Because in my opinion, everything is in a status of change now. And we might have a measure on census day, but quite frankly, within 3 months after that, everything might have changed again. So I don't think we've got a stable situation, and that's why I would vote for delay. However, you're dead right. It's extremely interesting. So I would also vote for us doing some kind of survey that captures what's going on.
Mohamed.
Yes, I agree with Reza, actually, because, and this might mix it also the issue of simple modeling and simple data collection. We always, in some cases, need to have simplicity in our modeling because of budget, because of time limitation, because there is no exist of complex models and others. And even in this issue, we need to work in simple. Models are dynamic. We have always maintenance for each model for every 5 years or something like that. We have to capture today. We have to capture what's happening today, even at macro level, at very strategic level. But we have to capture, and then going on and looking forward in 5 years, what's happened, our expectation was correct or not, in order to continue with our dynamic. Thanks.
Charlene, I'm going to hand back to you because we got 1 minute left to close the session. Reminding also people that the first Middle East session is starting in half an hour, so don't go away. Charlene.
I would just like to thank everybody for all of their inputs. I think it's been a very interesting discussion. I'm sorry I've been popping on and off, and I now need to go and just take a deep breath. But thank you very much for all of your contributions. I hope that the people in the audience got their questions answered, and really interesting to see the real interest in people's questions about data and modeling and where we're going to go. Watch this space, I guess. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.